I'm Margo Thorning, Senior Vice President, Chief Economist of the ACCF. Having watched this debate in Congress for the past 15 years, I'm reminded of a situation, I'm a lifelong horse lover, of trying to lead a horse over a cattle guard. You have large segments of the business community and the private sector concerned about moving forward on this type of legislation, just as a horse digs in his heels and will not be led through a cattle guard because he'll break his legs. He knows that. So I think it behooves us to look very carefully at what these policies might mean in terms of job growth and employment. When policymakers are confronted with the decision about whose model is best, what numbers are right, I think you need to distinguish between macroeconomic models used to look at the costs of climate bills and input-output models. Most government agencies and private think tanks rely on macroeconomic models because they're able to capture the dynamic impact of changes in energy prices, how they flow through the economy, how they impact production, how they impact capital stock and employment. Input-output models, which some organizations use, are static models. They're not able to capture the dynamic impacts of changes in energy prices. I'd like to share with you briefly the results of a study that the ACCF and the National Association of Manufacturers sponsored examining the impact of the Waxman-Markey bill. We used a macroeconomic model, the same model that the Department of Energy uses, the NIMS model. Our study showed that for the U.S. as a whole, by 2030, the Waxman-Markey bill would reduce gross domestic product relative to the baseline forecast between 1.7% and 2.4%. 2.4% of GDP may not sound like much, but it's about $600 billion. That's about what we're paying Social Security recipients right now. Job growth would be slowed. We did show that we'd pick up new green jobs. Certainly we will because of the provisions of the Waxman-Markey bill. But on balance, we lose between 1.7 and 2.4 million jobs in the year 2030. Household income is about $1,200 less than it otherwise would be. Some of the input-output studies that are out there show job growth. But again, as they admit, as the Center for American Progress study admits, they are not dynamic. They're not able to capture the impact of higher energy prices on the U.S. economy.
Now, much of one's conclusions is because of one's assumptions. And if you could tell us what your assumptions are that led to that result, it's much different from the results of other projections.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator, for that question. The assumptions that we used in our study are attached to the appendix, and I apologize if that didn't get to you last night, but I did send it in. It was inadvertently left off. But the reason the allowance costs are higher, as shown in Table 2 from our high-cost and low-cost case, is that we built in realistic assumptions about how quickly new technologies can be deployed. We assumed in our low-cost case that 25 new nuclear plants would be up and running by the year 2030. Now, we haven't built a nuclear plant since 1978, so to get 25 new plants, 25 gigawatts up in the next 18 years, we think is, between 2012 and 2030, pretty generous. Our high-cost case assumed 10 new nuclear plants in place by 2030. In terms of carbon capture and storage for coal and natural gas, the low-cost case assumes 60 gigawatts, the high-cost case about 30, and renewables similar, spread between how quickly we can deploy renewables, and all of those assumptions are attached to my testimony.
What market signals do these two bills show to rural and traditional fuel-dependent states, including coal, oil, gas, and agriculture industries? What would be the ripple effect in the state government field? I know this is a micro question, but I represent a micro state.
Thank you very much, Senator. I give you that remark, that analogy. But you might want to take a look at the analysis that the ACCF and NAM study did on your state. Our study, based on macroeconomic analysis, shows that gross state product in Kansas would be $5 billion less in 2030 compared to the baseline forecast, and that there would be between 21 to 29,000 fewer jobs as a result of the Waxman-Markey bill. So I certainly for an energy-intensive state like yours, this bill has pretty serious implications.
So, you know, how can you have a study that doesn't take into effect the impact of energy efficiencies or of the cost of inaction of not doing it? Let me just, you know, I don't have time to go into all of this, but I'll just leave you with this. I'd like your comment to it. This is today's Reuters. The cost, a story out of London. The world will have to spend an extra $500 billion to cut carbon emissions for each year it delays implementing a major assault on global warming, the International Energy Agency said on Tuesday. Every year's delay beyond next year will add another $500 billion extra. Now, I'd ask you, did you take that into account in your studies?
Those are very excellent questions, and there are a lot of them. I'll try my best to answer some of them. First, you ask, did we take account of the environmental impact of not enacting a cap-and-trade legislation? Well, EPA, I think Administrator Jackson testified recently that if the U.S. did achieve the targets in the Waxman-Markey bill, it really wouldn't matter by the end of this century because other countries, China and India in particular, are not willing to undertake hard targets. The Obama administration...
That's not accurate.
Well, the Obama
that is not
administration...
accurate. You have to be accurate. China has said they are going to do a specific energy intensity reduction. It's a 20% target. They've set it, and they've exceeded it thus far.
Well, we will see whether they're able to deliver on that. But until developing countries are willing to take on the same kind of targets that developed countries are, we really, according to EPA's own analysis, won't see meaningful reductions in GHG concentrations. Second, if you take a look at the studies you mentioned, the Center for American Progress study and the ACCEE study, which I cite in my testimony, they used input-output analysis. And let me read from my testimony. This is from the CAP report itself. They identify the problems with their analysis. They state, there are certainly weaknesses with our use of the input-output model. The most important is that it is a static model, a linear model, and a model that does not take into account the structural changes in the economy. So they admit that their model is inadequate for analyzing the dynamic impact of sharp increases in energy prices.
Now, Dr. Thorning, other witnesses on this panel have stated that the construction of facilities will create hundreds of permanent jobs in various parts of the country. Now, do you believe that create is the right word to use in this context? And should we not say shift if it appears that the coal, oil, and gas states would lose a significant amount of jobs and reduction in salaries?
Yes, Senator Hatch. It seems to me what we are looking at is a shift of where resources are deployed. And based on the study that ACCF and NAM did, as well as other studies cited in my testimony, there would be shifting of jobs. There would be new renewable energy efficiency jobs created, but overall, because of the loss of productivity, the premature obsolescence of the existing capital stock, there would be a slowing of economic growth overall compared to the baseline forecast.